So this is a response to, I mean, it's not just Richard Dawkins. It's kind of like the modern atheism in general, right? And what I'm saying is, I mean, I am someone who completely believes and respects everyone's personal journey for truth. And so I totally respect and support people believing in atheism, right? And it's fine. All I'm saying is that atheism is not, it's neither scientific nor logical. And I mean, that may come as a surprise to everyone, but I'll explain why I believe that. And that, in fact, true religion, true religious belief, true spiritual belief is more scientific and more logical than atheism is. Okay. And we have to kind of go back to what we were talking about the last time, because there's a couple caveats. And the biggest caveat here is people that have true spiritual faith, which means that it's not someone who's just religious because of cultural reasons, or because they're being tribal, because that is, people who are culturally religious and people who have true spiritual faith, they're all intermingled in the same community. And so it's really, and sometimes it's intermingled in the same person, so it's very difficult to separate that out. But it's a critical issue, because if you want to talk about spiritual things, you have to understand spirituality. And the issue with human beings is that cultural and social issues mix with spirituality. But to understand it, you have to separate it. So that's the caveat, is that what I'm talking about is true spiritual faith, based on spiritual experience. Not just because, my parents are Muslim, or my parents are evangelical Christian, and so I'm just towing the party line. You see what I'm saying? Right. You see the difference? And so with that caveat in mind, having faith based on true spiritual experience is more scientific and more logical than atheism. And what I would say in general, in response to Richard Dawkins, to the God delusion, is that, like I was telling you the other day, Richard Dawkins, on the Dunning-Kruger effect, on that scale, 1, 2, 3, he is a number 1. Meaning, on the Dunning-Kruger scale, a number 3 is someone who's an expert. So someone who understands some field or some issue, or has some skill in an expert level, to where if you ask that person, like, what is this, to explain that field, then that person will say, like, oh yes, it's like this, but it's also very complicated. So in other situations it could be like that, and it's never a very clear answer, because the universe is complicated, right? Everything is complicated, right? A number 2 would be someone that is kind of they don't know what they don't know, or meaning that they can't see the edges of the limits of what they don't understand, and so they get depressed, and they're like, there's no way that I can understand this thing, because it is so complex, it's so deep that there's no way that I can ever comprehend it to a point where it would be useful to me, and they feel like they'll never comprehend it. That's a number 2. But even they have more understanding of that subject than number 1s. Number 1s are people who have a very elementary understanding of it, and with that elementary understanding is so much greater than no understanding at all. Right? From 0 to 1 is a huge jump, and so they feel like, with that understanding, that elementary understanding, they feel like, oh yeah, I know everything about it. And when someone asks them about that thing, they'll say, oh yes, I'm an expert in this thing, and I can, and these are the solutions based on my knowledge. These are the solutions, this, and that, and it seems very, very simple, and very easy to understand, and it's like, yes, that's right. And those are the people that many people end up following, because everything seems so simple, and they're so confident, and they're so sure about that that they're the experts in the field when really they're number ones, when really they have no idea what they don't know. And Richard Dawkins is, based on what I read in the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins is someone who he's clearly one of the most brilliant minds of this generation, scientifically, and what he's done for evolutionary biology. He did things like name the concept of a meme in the 60s, and understanding society and breaking things down so that we could further understand them. But especially in his field of evolutionary biology, he's a brilliant mind. It's just that it seems like a lot of times when scientists think about spirituality, they tend to take out their brain, smash it on the floor, take a sledgehammer, continue smashing it, put it in a blender, smash it some more, and then throw it in the trash can. I don't understand why, but scientists, for some reason, and it's the same. It's the same thing on the other side too. A lot of people that are religious, they do the same thing when they think about science, and so it's like this because there is no. The conflict between science and religion is so minimal. It's so minuscule that it practically doesn't exist, right? But there's this kind of infantile, inane, schoolyard taunting brawl between science and religion that's been going on the last 300 years, and for some, unfortunately we've been caught up in this kind of name calling, stupid kind of, generations long conflict that isn't really necessary, But to get down to what I'm trying to say about Richard Dawkins is that, the main problem of his, first of all, do you follow what I'm saying?
No, I am. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have any, if you want any clarifications or
No, I'm listening. Yeah, no. We discussed it last time, so.
Okay. I don't remember exactly what we discussed and what we didn't.
Right.
But the major flaw in Richard Dawkins' book is that he looks at spirituality from a completely scientific perspective,
Right.
which is silly, which is ignorant of the issue that he's talking about. It would be like, in trying to analyze, this is what he does throughout the whole book, is he's just analyzing scientifically, scientists religious leaders or spiritual leaders that have tried to present proofs of God's existence, about how, all these proofs are incorrect logically and scientifically, and that's silly, because that's not what spirituality is. You can't prove that God exists through some kind of logical proof that someone came up with in the 1300s. That's just, and this is the problem that, the reason we've been having this stupid discussion for 300 years of this conflict between science and religion, is because science, basically 300 years ago, science said, okay, look, religion, this is, the Bible doesn't make any sense. From what I'm observing, the Bible doesn't make any sense. But actually, I don't think they didn't know it, but what they're saying is your interpretation of the Bible at this point doesn't make any sense. Because if you look at Genesis, Genesis is, this is one of the very few places where there could conceivably be a conflict between science and religion is just the first few chapters of Genesis. It talks about the creation of the world, right? And if you read those chapters, there's no reason to believe that the earth is 4,000 years old, right? There's no, it's not, the Genesis is not saying the earth is 4,000 years old, period. It's not a science textbook. It's just describing that God made the earth, and how God made it or whatever. That's up to science for us to understand, and anything that science says Of course that I must accept. Of course it's the truth. It's another way of understanding truth and of finding truth. And I can be completely faithful in my spirituality and find truth through spirituality, but at the same time also accept all the truth that we find through scientific means. I mean, because I believe that, personally, I believe that that's also God-given truth through science, you know. And so it's a false kind of thing for atheists to jump on the back of science and say, oh, look, this is what science says. Well, I believe that too. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. So basically 300 years ago, science says, you know, this is why your book is wrong, and this is why why religion and spirituality is wrong, because, you know, the earth is not 4,000 years old, for instance, or evolution or whatever. And then science or religion answers back in the language of science, or in the language of reason, right? And they try to have these proofs, or they have to say, okay, well, actually, no, creationism, or, you know, intelligent design, you know, the earth is actually only 4,000 years old, or, you know, whatever. It's religion or spirituality using the language of science to try and convince science that it's real according to the rules of science, which is insane. It would be like someone who, like a soccer player, for instance, equating science with a sport. Be like the soccer player going up to someone who is listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and saying, look, you're listening. This is not exciting at all. You know, it's just, what are you doing? You're just sitting here listening to this, and it's not exciting at all. I mean, where's the ball? Where are the players? You know, there's no one jostling around and kicking the ball and trying to get it in the goal. How can you call this interesting or exciting? And then the response, you know, with religion trying to use the language of science to convince science would be something like, oh, well, but look at the conductor. He has like a stick, and could be kind of like a ball. He's moving it around, and there are like people on the stage, you know, just like there are players on the stage, and there's some kind of conflict and tension. And be like, what do you mean conflict and tension? I don't see. There's no, you know, there's no ball. There's no nets. You know, how can this be exciting? Well, yeah, but it is kind of. You see, you know, there are people on this side and people on that side, and where it's like, that's not what makes. I mean, it's a completely different language. It's a completely different thing. It's a completely different experience. And so that's what religion has been trying to do to answer science over the last 300 years, when science has no clue, no concept of people in science that are atheists, that are saying that, you know, God doesn't exist, are looking at science, are looking at religion, and not understanding there's a completely different kind of experience.
Right. So yeah, because when Dawkins would, like your analogy to sports, Dawkins would expect science to use, religion to use science to explain itself.
Right, but it's not.
And you're saying that religion cannot be defined through the language or parameters or tools of science.
Right, because it's a different kind of experience. In the same way, like, for example, if it was, you know, something like chess.
Yeah,
you know, it's a different. And the problem with Dawkins' book is that he's, through the whole book, he's just using the language of science to say that, you know, that religion doesn't make any sense, without understanding anything about music. And, you know, not even getting close to understanding about the effect that music has on the emotions and on the soul, you know, because he doesn't use the language, has no idea what it is.
So what would Dawkins have to do to understand religion?
This is the thing, is that Dawkins, there are certain ways. I'm not saying that I mean, there is a position that you can have that is. I mean, I have to explain first why I think atheism is not scientific. It's not scientific and it's not logical. Because
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the last thing I saw on an interview with his position is how did you arrive to the point that they're atheists?
right,
Is that they say that they cannot prove that God does not exist. They can't.
right,
But they come to their conclusion because they feel that
it's so improbable.
science can't prove God either.
Right.
And so when something can't be proven, in their minds, their conclusion is that therefore he doesn't exist, or it seems like most likely he doesn't. So,
Well, listen, this is what their thing is, though. There's a couple of things to respond to that. One is that he's assuming that you can prove every phenomena in existence.
Correct.
Which is silly, because anytime anyone in science has said that we understand everything, they've been proven incorrect.
But he has, I mean, in recent times, said that he's open for science to evolve to a place that one day they might be able to.
Sure. I mean, they might be able to measure spiritual experience.
He's saying that currently, as far as how far science is, has evolved, he feels that currently where science stands, it's just pointing to a high probability.
Right. And this is what he says in the book too.
Yeah.
There's such a high probability that 99.99% that God doesn't exist, that there's no reason to believe that he does. Right. But this is the fallacy. Because again, he's trying to understand. I mean, again, it's like saying someone who plays soccer saying that, the symphony isn't interesting because there's no ball and there's no goals, and there are no players.
Yeah.
Right. He's not understanding what he's looking at. He's trying to measure. He's taking what people have said from the area of spirituality, trying to prove religion scientifically, which it can't be.
Right, he's within his own domain.
Right,
He's within his own domain.
and then this is the reason why it's not scientific, because he's completely ignoring the experience of billions and billions of people throughout history. I mean, because of my caveat, how can you say like whether a person has had true spiritual experience or whether they're just being, culturally, they're cultural. They have this faith because their parents gave it to them. It's impossible to tell, right? But let's say it's half, or whatever. Still, there are billions and billions of people throughout history who have had spiritual experience, science can never look at someone something that it doesn't understand. And say, I know you don't exist. And if you're looking at billions upon billions of people with this kind of experience, it doesn't make any sense to say, I'm right just because I haven't had that experience, or that experience doesn't exist because it doesn't fit within my worldview. How does it make any sense for one person to say that? If they're thinking from a logical point of view. Now there are ways I think that science could approach spirituality, and I'm not saying that anyone who I understand if someone has not had spiritual experience in their life. Yeah, I'm not saying that.
So now saying that the analogy you made to soccer and music.
Right.
Now that you have framed it to where science does not have the scope or the capacity
or the tools
to define spirituality. How can you describe and explain what are the tools to define spirituality? How do you define
Right.
it? What the languages, the rules, the playbook, whatever it is?
Right. The issue is it's I mean, yes, there are certain language that many people use across many different traditions. But it's we just haven't, because spirituality because it's such a deep part of our being, and it's so hard to observe, that we haven't developed clear language in the same way that we have for things we can't observe. You know, so it's a difficult thing to describe, and that's why it's such a difficult issue. You know, I mean, as I was saying before, okay, so I guess kind of what your question maybe is like, what is spiritual experience?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
like when you express yourself and say spiritual experience, and you say that to the best of your ability,
Right.
to help.
I think there are many kinds of spiritual experiences. There are spiritual experiences that I don't understand, that I haven't had, but I can express my own spiritual experience, and I can express maybe like basic experiences that I would call spiritual that most people have had, right? Like I was saying the last time we talked, I mean, going up on top of a mountain in nature, I mean, there is a certain kind of an intense kind of a peace that is not emotional. You know, it's different than emotion. It's a kind of intense sort of a peace that you feel almost like a presence. I mean, have you felt that kind of thing before? Like when you in nature or something. Like, can you describe if you go to the top of a mountain, or you're in nature and there's no one else around? How would you describe that experience?
I'm trying to recall. Like, I mean, I've had in my time, you know, like a sense of wonder, right? A sense of wonder.
Okay.
But again, as I expressed to you, I also have a sense of, unfortunately, like I'm very quickly able to have a sense of, in the same environment, a sense of pessimism.
Kind of despair.
Well, I would, well, basically this is how it would be exactly. I would look around and see all the beauty, of, say, the countryside and the sky. And in the same moment, I'll look to the ground and I'll see a dead animal.
Right.
And I will see it with eyes and intestines and liver, and I go like, that's no different from me.
Right.
And I have the perception that that animal is a dead carcass going nowhere. And so I just think I'm that thing. I'm just I'm on that same level.
I see. Okay.
And that's how, ultimately, like how my experiences have gone. My interaction with both the wonder. So, because I'm always somebody who's very disturbed by the how this world is such a beautiful and ugly place. It's what troubles me all the time. That regardless of all the beauty, there's also horrific pain and suffering. For some people, or even for we will experience it. From time to time. Good and bad. And so to me, like, I've been lucky to have a lot of good experiences. Had some bad, but not bad to where like I've been captured and tortured and put through horrific suffering, right? But I know it's out there, and we do everything we can avoid it. Some people can't avoid it; they end up becoming victims of it. So, to me, I mean, I'm just always somebody who just sees that there's this coin, this two-sided coin, all the time, everywhere.
Well, I think it is. I think there's a negative aspect to spirituality as well. I mean, for instance, like another way I would describe spirituality is when people talk about something being dark,
Yeah.
and then there's an opposite of that, of something having light as well.
Sure.
That person is really dark.
But what I'm trying to address your direct explanation.
The first thing I was talking about.
Which is me standing in the wonder of the world, right?
Right, of nature.
Of nature, Grand Canyon, whatever, and me feeling that sense of wonder. And at the same time, I would say, like, I would look down to the ground and see a dead animal and feel the sense of nothing.
Right.
Right. They're both sensory reactions, right? The sense of wonder.
Right.
And then the sense of
nothingness.
and that nothingness is what I would.
That's what you're grabbing
I
onto.
Would say gives me my leanings towards labeling myself as an atheist.
I see.
Because
that is your experience, your subjective experience.
Feel like I'm having a profound experience with the beauty, and then feeling like there's a greater, higher being or creator or something out there.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, that's
behind this.
I mean, this is. I mean, I respect that because it's your subjective experience. You know, that's you're interacting with the world and with everything, with the universe, and that's your experience as you interact with the universe, and that's what you're basing it on,
and
right?
I'm saying like when I'm interacting is like I'm always that's why I'm always in the center, even politically or whatever. Even when I was in college writing term papers, it was very difficult for me to get caught up with this idea of like take a term paper, take a topic, and then go and then push the defense of it, right? Of a defense of this idea, because I always would end up coming to a point where I feel like I can see both sides. So I found it great. I found it great. It was very difficult for me to write papers in school. Because
and so you're saying you can see both sides of like you can feel the wonder but also feel the emptiness.
Right. You see, so if I only felt the wonder, I think I would probably be then thinking, oh yes, there is something out there.
Right.
But the moment I feel like there's this nothingness, then I feel that nothingness sort of like I feel like just pulls me into like thinking that there is nothing.
Right.
Even though, like I was saying, I'm in the center, and I should be open to the idea that both is possible, and I guess I am open to the idea that both is possible. But I would just be honest and say, because I see the emptiness, it quickly like sort of like is a wet blanket to my experience with the wonder.
Sure.
And it's happening very quickly, meaning like it's not like I see the wonder and experience it for hours and then I see the darkness. I'll just be like see that for a few moments, and then and then something will something depressing will consume me.
This is the thing, is what I'm trying to say is that is, to me, that's also an aspect of spiritual experience. That emptiness, that darkness is negative spiritual experience, and so I think that so many people experience that and they don't classify it as, but I think it is also spiritual experience. But you can kind of
I mean, I guess if you want to use that word spiritual
to try and understand, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to differentiate between spiritual and emotional and physical and intellectual. There are four completely different processes of the human being, and I'm trying to suss out what a spiritual experience would be. And what you're saying, this is one very foundational kind of spiritual experience, is a sense of wonder at nature, or experiencing some kind of presence, or some kind of intense peace inside of you. That is one, that would be the positive spiritual experience. And then this feeling of nothingness and darkness is the negative flip side of that spiritual experience. And that kind of peace compared to emptiness is an aspect that kind of comes up again and again with different kinds of spiritual experiences. So a different kind of spiritual experience is like not in nature, as I was saying. It would be with some other kind of thing in life, a person or an event where you feel like, oh, that was really dark,
Right.
Or another kind of experience where you feel like, oh, that you feel some kind of light within you as you experience that, but that's something that's not emotional, or something like there's a kind of spiritual knowledge as well, which is different than intellectual knowledge, which is something, because our moral sense is also part of our spiritual being, and I'm not saying that. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, they defend religion by saying, oh, if you don't believe in God, then you can't have any kind of moral sense. That's not true.
Right.
And of course I agree with atheists that say that's not true. Because every single person has some kind of moral sense within them, unless you're a sociopath, right? And that moral sense is not an emotional thing. and it's not an intellectual thing. It's a spiritual thing. And so that moral sense, when you feel kind of deep within yourself, okay, some guy killing 6 women and then eating their flesh, that's not right.
For sure.
You know, and you don't, and it's dark, you know, and you don't need, it doesn't come from cultural conditioning. Because that would be something that's wrong in almost every single, I mean, some societies, maybe there's like 1% exception, but almost every single human society in the history of the world, you know, and you could say, oh, there are evolutionary reasons for that. Yeah, sure, I understand that. But I think everything has this yin and yang. Everything has a physical side and a spiritual side, and a physical reason and a spiritual reason. And that feeling, I would say, is kind of, that moral sense is a spiritual kind of experience. And a spiritual kind of knowledge would be something like, I feel deeply within me that human beings are not meant to be slaves.
No.
For instance, that's something that you just know is kind of in your bones. No one has to tell you that. If you were a slave, you would know, I'm not supposed to be a slave. You know, there's no one I can't say no one, but that's kind of something that you just know spiritually, not intellectually. You know, it could affect your emotion, but the actual feeling of, or the actual experience of knowing that's not right would affect your emotions, and you would say that's not right. You would get angry if you know, or you could feel happiness that someone was freed, for instance. You know, but that knowledge is spiritual. And it's related to your moral sense, right? And so what I'm just describing here are spiritual experiences that most people could relate to. If I'm trying to describe what is a spiritual experience and different types of spiritual experience, those are all things that most people would probably be able to relate to. But that's at a very basic level.
Sure.
And the thing is, though, if that's a 1, then you can go up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those deeper spiritual experiences, you know, if you don't have that experience, it would be very difficult to understand it. Like, for example, I say to you that I experience a relationship with God. You know, I understand that's not something that you can comprehend.
No.
You know?
I won't be able to.
In the same way that Stephen Hawking probably couldn't comprehend, you know, doing the pole vault. You know, if he never experienced that before, you know, he could imagine it. Okay, I imagine what it must be like, you know, or someone that's blind imagining, you know, what it must be like to see color.
Right.
You know, if you haven't had that experience, I understand that it just doesn't make any sense to you. But what I'm saying is billions of people have had that experience. And to look at, you know, all of these subjective experiences, granted it's subjective, but all these subjective experiences and say, oh, you all don't understand what you've experienced. I understand what you've experienced better than you. Why? Well, because that's my worldview. Doesn't make any sense. And it's not scientific. What would be scientific, if we're talking about, you know, someone who has had no concept of spiritual experience, cannot understand, and only understands from a scientific perspective. If they're, agnosticism is something that, okay, I accept as scientific. You know, I don't understand what that is. I don't know what that is. You know, and so I can't have any opinion on it. So you talk about that, okay, okay, fine, whatever, but I don't know. That's scientific and logical to me.
Right.
I don't think it's in the spirit of science. Because the spirit of science would be, oh, that's something I don't understand. I want to try and understand that. So if I was saying someone is being a scientist, that was being true to the spirit of science, that was interested in this subject and wanted to write about it, would try and find some way, you know, scientifically to approach it. You know? I mean, what's a scientific way to approach spirituality? I mean, I'm not sure. But you could say something like Alcoholics Anonymous has in their creed, about faith in God. Okay, so maybe you could look at a control group that doesn't have that, part in their creed, and someone that does, and see what kind of effect. I mean, these experiments where it's like these prayer experiments where they pray to see. I mean, it's so simplistic. It just doesn't.
The science.
Right, we say, oh yeah. Well, some even some religious people will do it. Will say, okay, we're gonna pray to get this person better. I mean, they have so little, in my mind, so little comprehension of. It's almost a superstitious understanding of spirituality, where okay, we're gonna pray, and this person will get better, and so we're prove that prayer works. I mean, it's so simplistic that it's kind of silly, and I guess maybe I should, at this point, explain the difference between superstition and faith. That's another one of the caveats. One caveat is that it's real spiritual experience compared to just cultural tradition. Another one is true faith as opposed to superstition. And what's the difference? And one religion will have very superstitious aspects as well as having true faith. Superstition tends to be someone coming to God and saying, I want this, and so you must give it to me. For example, praying to God and saying, I want to get an A on the test, or praying to God and saying, I want to. I mean, you can. It's not necessarily superstition to want God to bless you.
Right.
But the purpose of spirituality is not because I want things in this life. The purpose of spirituality is the other way, where some kind of faith will make the believer a better person, will work on their soul to make them a better person, will give them spiritual power where they can be more loving, where they can be more empathetic. I mean, that's the real power of spirituality. And so when it's going the other way, for example, like, I'll give two examples, one of Buddhism and one of Catholicism, where they both have superstitious elements and elements of faith. Like traditional Buddhism, that requires someone to follow the Eightfold Path and to be very introspective, to try and be empathetic with the pain of all living things. That's something that, to me, I would classify as to use language of Western religion, but like true faith, in the sense that spiritual experience is making you a better person. Whereas, in popular Buddhism, that concept doesn't really exist. It's basically you go to the pagoda and you see the statue and you pray, please give me a car, or whatever it may be. That's superstition. And it's the same way in Catholicism. You can pray to a statue of Mary or one of the saints and say, I want this, but that's superstition. Whereas Catholicism, building hospitals and serving other people, the great work that the Catholic Church does, that is true faith. That's helping the believers, the servers, to become better people, to become more like God in that tradition, and so I don't even remember why I got out of that. But you have to me, it's important. That's the second caveat. It's important to make that distinction when you're trying to understand spiritual experience, the difference between superstition and true faith.
Right.
So in the end, I understand that scientists, are not scientists, because there are many scientists who are very religious. That's the thing that is like you have to recognize, is that you can completely accept and this is the thing, is that sometimes people say, oh, look at religion, there's some contradiction even within, there's contradiction between religion and science. So one minuscule part of religion and science that is contradictory is the Garden of Eden, right? Because I can accept evolution. It doesn't, the Bible doesn't ever say like how God made everything, and science is saying how it happened. But there might be some contradiction, like in the Garden of Eden. You know, like, what is that? You know, when the fall of Adam, where it's like everything becomes spiritual to physical. You know, it goes from an immortal state to a state where it could die. You know, what does that mean? And how does that apply to actual events that happened in history? You know, that's a question I have. I don't know. I don't understand the answer. I don't know the answer to that. And you could look at that and say, oh, look, that's a contradiction. But it's not. It's just because there's something we can't explain doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just we don't have enough information to completely understand it and how they would resolve the resolution between those two apparent contradictions.
Right.
I mean, if you're talking about one specific thing in this one religion of Christianity, because science has its own contradictions. For example, you have quantum physics compared to classical physics. I mean, those are two major areas of science that are in apparent contradiction, and people are trying to find a unified theory. I mean, that's great, you know. But just because they're, you know, in the quantum world, you can move from point A to point B without moving the space in between, which is completely different in the macro world where you have to move. Right. I can't teleport from here to there.
Right.
You know, and the rules are completely different and they can't explain it. It doesn't mean that either quantum physics or classical physics are wrong.
Right.
It just means that we don't have enough understanding yet to resolve them. Right. You know, and I think a lot of what people do in religion is they try to create a unified theory, basically. And they come up with intelligent design, for instance, to try to explain what they feel like are the gaps or the contradiction between science and religion. And I guess I'm not offended by that. I think they're wrong. If science says that's not true, the Earth is not 6,000 years old or whatever it is, it's actually 4 billion years old, then you have to accept that it's wrong. But that doesn't mean that religion is wrong.
Right.
It just means that unified theory is wrong. And so a lot of scientists will look at that effort and say, oh, because of intelligent design, religion is wrong and spiritual experience doesn't exist, which is insane. Of course it exists. It's existed through all of human history. It exists now. Billions of people have spiritual experiences. They have experiences with God or with some kind of other kind of knowledge you can have that's not physical. You know? That's what I think.